A few years ago, pouring ideas back and forth with Royal in our usual fashion, he told me of a peculiar establishment he used to run in one of his campaigns. Some of you may recognize it from the acclaimed Critical Role group as the Mudhole. The second you step into this one, however, you're greeted by a one-eyed hob-goblin sink a foot or so into the mud. The poor bastard's establishment was sinking into the ground, but for some reason, most fledgling and seasoned adventurers alike found their way to this establishment to relay their journey. We even joked of naming a business venture after the idea, and sincerely hoped to build something where many characters and their stories can be recounted one day. I spent the better part of my day in a stupor creating just such a character, instead of animating, which I hope to share eventually as well. Kuroha, the dragon kid, spent the better part of his youth obsessed with dragons and lizard folk, such as the kobolds of the nearby mines and tunnels beneath Baldur's Gate. His obsession would eventually lead to his capture and unlikely rescue by a cult of Tiamat that had recently infiltrated the city in response to a hoard of treasure stolen by, well, coincidentally, another cult of the devil-kind origin. He abandoned his family in search of the greatest dragon of all, the legendary Tiamat. Frequent exploration of the tunnels made him an invaluable initiate for the coming assault. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be. The mission to receive the stolen hoard was lost as an intrepid group of new arrivals, so-called adventurers, beat them to the treasure. They had one last chance, an ambush lie in wait atop the bathhouse for the adventurers tired from their fight with the devil cultists of Baldur's Gate. Misfortune befell him once more as they were slaughtered by the powerful treasures obtained, the treasures that rightfully belonged to Tiamat and her brood. There was a large orc, naked save a loincloth that lifted his axe high above his head, but another stayed his coup de grace. Kuroha's eyes burned as he looked up to see his own father, constable of the city, burrowing down into him. He would spend 2 long years in the dungeon, where even rest eluded him, as rats constantly nipped at his feet, should he fall still for too long. Baldur's Gate was notoriously hard on prisoners. Starvation, amongst other things, were common. By his second month, Kuroha was broken. He found that his best recourse for survival would be feasting on the plentiful scavengers that did the same of him. The trial finally came, only because of his father, he was sure. Most would rot, never having seen any such rite. He could only imagine how horrible he must have looked to the jeering crowd before him. He had no means of cleaning himself, and he was made to lie close to his own waist for weeks at a time, legs shaking. The rags he wore provided no solace from the bitter cold of the winter. There were some that seemed sympathetic. Towards the back of the mob he saw his own mother, who wept, and his sister who averted her eyes as if knowing he had spotted them. What a fool he had been to abandon them. Please, Tiamat, give me strength. The trial concluded, and he was to be banished with no provisions proffered, save a single boon from his family. He spent 3 more nights in a cell before being led to the city gate where his family stood beside the door. A sharp sting found his face, followed by the warm embrace of his mother. Madison, his sister, looked away once more, now cradling a small child. He attempted to speak, but was shoved by the city guard to continue. His father reached out a hand and grasped his shoulder, giving a wry smile. A smile that didn't match what he expected of a man sending his son to death, but to a new life. He offered not clothing, but a ring with a blue-crested jewel. Of course, his first thoughts were the abandoned tunnels not far from the mines. The kobolds were probably still there, but winter brings many perils of its own. Luckily, the ring proved the perfect boon. It warmed him as if he wore the thickest of coats. He made camp and survived a week on boiled snow, insects, and what he managed to pilfer from the kobolds. Examining his ring, he noticed an inscription that bid him go to the Dragon's Lair in a few weeks' time. The Dragon's Lair provided the sanctuary of imagination when he was younger, and made for a great base of operations for him and his childhood friends. It was another week before a familiar group of adventurers appeared there to make camp. Looks as though the boy either perished or found his own way. No, I can sense him near. Come out from around the bend. Shamefully, Kuroha did so. The orc, his would-be executioner, was one of the first to stand and guide him by the fire. I would have split your head had your father not stopped me that day, you know. Fate seems to have a hand in your fortune. Kuroha looked into the fire. I'm I'm not sure fortune is the right word. I've lost everything save my very life. The group began to laugh. Everything save your life, boy, and by my account, it's owed to me. He would spend the next year traveling with the group, mostly playing dragon expert and scout. His skills in the caverns of the Underdark intrigued the ranger of the party with deep black eyes. He began studying the ways of tracking, nature, and even swordplay. After a peril with the prestigious family of Drow, the group was headed to Avernus in search of the fallen city of El Terrell. You're a capable man now. I think you've earned a piece of information. A ranger isn't really a ranger until they undergo a final bit of training, you see. One of the Brotherhood sects. You don't have the makings of a Gloomstalker. He removed the plate from his left arm and revealed the tattoo of a skull and a cloaked dagger. He then pulled Kuroha's arm out and revealed the brand of Tiamat burned deeply into his skin. There is a sect that is clandestine to most rangers. They guard the best-held secrets of draconic origin. Your knowledge may gain you entry into their ranks, but be warned, you will be tested with your very life. A hand was placed atop his head, and great fatigue washed over him. When next his eyes opened, he was alone, surrounded by the parting gifts of his comrades. A dragon-tooth necklace he often coveted from the Gruul, the orc. A very familiar ring that went missing a few years back from the party's thief. An emerald stone polished to a mere surface from the sorceress, and many rations and necessities of adventure. The gift of the ranger was apparent immediately. It was as if the world urged him forward into the unknown. Several months of travel eventually led him to Ravnica, where a page by the name of Fizban joined his company. He turned out to be a novice sorcerer of sorts, and they journeyed through several perils in search of the dragon sect. The page proved more than invaluable, discovering the shimmering protective magic that sealed away a hidden plane of existence. Greeted by two ironclad dragonborn, he was awestruck. He had read of these people, ones that were gifted with the visage of a dragon. They were confused laying eyes on two humans, but their orders were simple. Bring those who come without the seal of the Brotherhood to the arbitrator for rite of passage. They guided him to a swamp alone, where he stood face to face with an emerald dragon. I can't believe it! He bowed in reverence to the creature. It began speaking to him in Draconic. If you can understand me, let it be known. When Kuroha replied, the dragon seemed pleased. Now then, what gift of knowledge do you bestow for my boon? Lore had it that the emerald dragons were both psychic and incredibly knowledgeable. I've none to offer. The emerald dragon reached its sharp talons forward and bore them into a skull where blood seeped down, soaking into the ground. I disagree. There's a wealth of information here. Something that I definitely hadn't foreseen. Fizban stepped beside him. Had he followed? They were supposed to stand judgment alone. I see you're still dabbling in mortal affairs, Fizban, or should I say Bahamut. The emerald dragon lowered its head in respect. A gust of air blew Kuroha aside, and he looked on where now stood two dragons, one significantly larger, with platinum scales that gleamed even in the swamps surrounding them. They were clearly speaking to one another, but the world seemed all but mute from where he sat. What did it matter? He was witnessing the mighty Bahamut standing before him. The platinum god gave him one final look before flying away. A veritable wave of sound washed over him. Bahamut has willed you be able to stand the trial of the Drake Warden. Generally, the honor is only bestowed to those of my dragon kin. Do not expect an easy trial. You will be hated, ostracized, and perhaps even killed. Upon return of the sanctuary, he was met mostly with sneers, but that did little to hide his excitement as the Dragonborn rode atop all variety and sizes of drakes. The coming months were grueling. He was made to fight barehanded against poisonous worms, cures allotted only when at the brink of his life, burned by fire and acid, chilled by the coldest of frosts, electrocuted, and even mentally broken through psychic torture. The only thing that kept him going was the thought of receiving his dragon egg, his very own life-bonded partner, there was no greater reward in life. He would be taught every known aspect of aberration and monstrosity, who would be his sworn adversary as a Drake Warden. On the night of the ceremony, he would begin his final trial, the raising of the worm. Misfortune found him while out on a scouting mission for a watcher sighting, a sure sign of a beholder lurking. The tip turned out to be fake, and when he returned, he was immediately brought before the Emerald Dragon once more. "You dare to break tradition, and after showing such promise." Kuroha pleaded he had no idea of what they spoke of. "Please, read my thoughts, I shan't resist." The Emerald Dragon obliged, its claws piercing into his skull as it did a year ago. The truth revealed, his fellows planted the egg in his quarters, and most likely spread the false rumor of the Watcher. "Nicolaides, stand before me." The Dragonborn walked beside Kuroha and took a knee. "It's most likely a psychic block, Your Eminence. He has been trained in mental tortures, The dragon reached forward, burrowing its claws into the Dragonborn. "You dare to test my prowess? Even now you kneel before me and contest my probe into your mind." Suddenly, the Dragonborn went limp. "While I do not approve of your methods, the judgment of your brothers seems to point to your banishment." Tears stung Kuroha's eyes. "Their decisions are fueled by jealousy and a false pride of my kin, while you stand a human in our midst. I have punished the one who falsely accused and constructed such a deceptive ploy, but I cannot rule your acceptance into the sect. Let it stand the votes cast by your would-be brethren." 23 Dragonborn now stood in mass beside him, some mentally connected, others in person. "Who would stand against this initiate on the day of his ceremony?" Kuroha looked up to the Dragonborn surrounding him. They seemed larger than life in the weight of their decision. All of his hard work for naught. The first to step forward was a blue dragonkin, whose mature blue dragon demanded respect despite only being an illusion of psychic connection. "I stand against a human. He has no right to the ward. Their race is weak, bloodline of no significance, and far-reaching from worthy." The green dragon made a nod. "I'll remind you that he has survived the grueling challenges of initiation and faced the challenges you pride your own worth on." The dragonkin spit on the ground and then phased into the mob. Another stepped forward, a redkin with a medium drake. "Ha! He'd probably get his worm killed. Look how he weeps in judgment. He even bore the mark of Tiamat when he arrived." One after another, 9 made their case against his entry. 3 stood their ground, his greatest mentor, rider of the Elder White Dragon, your Vissel. Evelyn, the black dragonkin rival initiate that often eyed his every peril with a smirk. And a legend amongst the riders, whose platinum scales gleam with his incredibly rare lineage. It is unjust, given there is no code against those that stand trial. Dragonkin are usually the only participants, because they are only ones with the ability to enter the field. Bahamut himself granted permission. "I've heard you who stand before me, and render your will so. Kuroha will be cast from the sanctuary and stripped of his right of trial of the Drake Warden. The will of Bahamut is respected, but even he knows justice lies within the law of code, and a vote of banishment is binding to those who swear oaths, including the initiates." A green flame enveloped him, burning his skin before blinding him in its intensity. The sounds of townsfolk filled the air. Children played about the street, and he was left with the clothes on his back and 25 gold pieces. The tears flowed freely, and one of the townsfolk, a woman of extraordinary beauty, took him to a nearby inn. She used prestidigital magic to clean him up and willed he tell his story. Kuroha found he couldn't. The words would just stop before he could form them. She took pity, and over the course of the next few months nurtured the broken pieces of the man. Her name was Heldressa, and her knowledge of draconic lore was extraordinary. And even though he could never speak of the sanctuary, they had long conversations on a plethora of other knowledge he'd procured throughout his lifetime of now 31 years. One night, as they lay together, she told of an overbearing mother amongst many siblings. He awoke to a letter and a small vial of a black substance. The truth will only bring madness to those that serve the Dark Queen. To see through the eyes of a dragon, one must enkindle its essence. He only knew of one, the Dragon Queen herself, Tiamat. Even his superior tracking skills left no trace of Heldressa. She was just gone. He took the vial from his pocket and placed it under his nose. He knew this scent. It was the blood of a black dragon. Where had she obtained such a thing? It dawned on him she must have been affiliated with the cult somehow. The ward often hunted its members to ensure Tiamat's power never grew beyond control. Irrational, he assumed the worst. They were watching him and took her to punish him. Wait, maybe all wasn't lost. She'd left him the vial of blood. Maybe she meant him to drink it, and he'd be able to get back in. The trip took several days, but the forested land and swamps were more than familiar to him. Reaching the mountain he knew to be the Veil, he passed the vial hand to hand. But what had she meant by madness? It didn't matter. There was so little left to his life after everything was taken. He popped the cork and downed it. The bitterest of licorice washed over his tongue, and the effects were instant. Collapsing to the ground, the world seemed to pulse. The veins of his hands bulged black. His left arm ached bitterly, and the magically erased mark of Tiamat appeared once more. Had he drank the blood of the Dragon Queen? The sensation was overpowering. The darkness overtook him. When next he awoke, he'd been tied to the trunk of a tree, a medium red drake staring at him with the intent of voracious hunger. A familiar red dragon king greeted him. "When they only exiled you, I knew we'd still have a problem. It was a long trip home, but I see it was worth it." Nicolaides, the one who plotted the ruse, sat in a chair not far, his mouth agape, drooling. "I bet you didn't know that was my brother. You're the reason he can no longer form a reasonable thought." He attempted to deceive the... A heavy hand found Kuroha's diaphragm, and his last words were mute. "I don't care why. If you weren't here, none of it would have happened. Now, the real question is how to take my sweet time opening you up and feeding you piece by piece to Persephone." The drake took a step forward, its wings unfurling to further its mighty silhouette. Kuroha smiled to himself, looking down. "At least I got to meet them. Legends, myths, it's more than a worthless human could have hoped for." A tear rolled down as he watched the shadow of the drake pull back its talon. Just before imminent death, a green drake of similar size tackled it into the forest out of view. The Redkin drew his blade, but was hit in the shoulder by a glowing arrow and dove behind a tree as a small volley preceded it. "Looks like I'm the one saving the damsel in distress." It was Evelyn, her sleek black scales blending perfectly with the shadows. "I should probably warn you, that poison belongs to this little guy's mother." A small baby green drake walked beside her. "And their sister's bite packs quite the punch as well." The thrashing of the red and green drakes could be heard from above. The Redkin whistled, and in a flurry of haste mounted his drake using some kind of teleportation magic as it swiftly flew past them, leaving a trail of flames in its wake. Evelyn began chuckling. "I'm surprised that worked. I'd only hit him with a lesser variant, hardly an ancient green dragon's blood." She cut him down, then walked over to Nicolaides, kicking him from the chair with an impressive display of martial prowess before taking the seat and sitting just in front of Kuroha. "You know, you're an idiot for coming back. Lucky for you, Heldressa warned me you might. She has a nasty habit of fooling around at the most inopportune of times." He looked up to her, the relief finally overtaking him. "Wait, you know Heldressa?" She laughed again. "Well, of course I do. She's my mother, after all." The world seemed to stop in that moment. Heldressa, the woman who nurtured him, was a dragon? "And I guess that makes you sort of like my father-in-law." He glanced up as his heart sank. "What?" "Well, you know the birds and the bees," and she stopped and walked into the forest, returning with an obsidian egg. "And, well, congratulations." Words couldn't describe the feelings that overcame him as he coddled the egg. "Now, I'd suggest you run. Oh, and take this." She traced a claw around Nicolaides' neck and tore the flesh from his skull. "Sorry we're going to have to hunt you, but I can't blow my cover just yet." Kuroha looked down to the warm, formless skin of Nicolaides. Cover? And what about Tiamat's blood? What was that? She gave a sharp smile. That was her blood, you dote, and you should be thankful. She hates her mother. Then flew off back towards the Veil. The body of Nicolaides was gone, save the flesh of his face in one hand and the obsidian egg beside his feet. He managed to escape Ravnica, and knew the perfect place to hatch the egg, the self-named childhood dragon's lair by the cove of Baldur's Gate. At last, he would be given the final trial, the raising of the worm. The ward did indeed begin to hunt him, and Nicolaides' face proved a useful disguise to many who would spread the word of a human that flew upon a black dragon. Eventually, he did meet Heldressa once more. She gave him insight into just what it was she expected of him. None other than her usurpation of Tiamat, her mother. Sorry we don't have decisions for this one, but we love to hear some of your stories as well. I can't promise it yet, but the mudhole might live yet. Thank you for being patient with us. If you listen to some of our other stories, it's difficult figuring out if the tree requires pruning, so to speak, or if a new story should unfold. Until next time, let's write a story. Let's play a game. Without the dice.